Hello everyone, it's Shannon here for Waffle Flower Crafts. In today's video, I'll be showing you how to create a very sweet no-line watercolor card in which I use Daniel Smith watercolors. I'm using the Always stamp set as well as the Always matching die. This is the combo. When you purchase the combo, you get the stamp set and the dies in the cloud storage package. So it's a great deal, plus you save $2 on top of it when you buy the combo. I'm going to go ahead and pull off all the flowers and all the leaves from the Always stamp set to stamp a background on an A2 panel of cold press Channin watercolor paper. I'm going to ink these images up in a distress ink, antique leaden, which is a light color, because I'm going to do no line watercoloring. I'm just going to stamp about half of the panel at once, and then I will reposition the stamps and stamp more of the panel so I have the complete panel covered with these flowers and leaves. Once I finish stamping this portion, I will rotate my panel around and fill in some of the open spots. There's a couple open spots here, and I'll just stamp these flowers like one more time, and now my panel is basically done. Now I have another scrap of watercolor paper here, and I'm going to stamp one of the flowers and the bird on this scrap of watercolor paper. I'm going to later die cut these out and add them to the front of my card. Once I finish stamping the bird and the flower, I'll actually have all my images stamped, and now we'll be ready to watercolor. So here is my watercolor palette here. I have all my Daniel Smith watercolors swatched out there on a piece of watercolor paper, and my colors are in these little pans. I'm going to use the palette to mix my colors on. I actually use all the colors pretty much from the pan except for two. I mixed, or I should say just one color I do mix with another. But these are pretty much straight from the pan. I'm starting off with a coral, which is on the screen here. All the colors I use will be on screen so you can follow along. And I'm going to start painting petals halfway with this coral color. And I am picking petals. I'm not painting petals directly next to each other because I don't want the colors to bleed. Now that I've got some of the petals painted with the coral, I'm moving on to Aussie red gold and painting the upper portion or upper half of each petal and creating a little gradation from that gold to the coral. And now I'll move on to some other petals. Even though I probably should have waited more for these petals to dry, I'll paint a couple more, and then I will move on to the leaves and stems because I'm trying to avoid painting where it's still wet and getting the colors to kind of mix too much. I do want that nice gradation. I don't want it to be all coral or all peachy. I do want that nice gradation of that yellow to the coral. So now I'm moving on to my green, and I'm going to just paint the leaves and stems with this green, which is straight out of the tube. And you can see here how I'm mixing a little of the green with the petal here, because I should have waited a little bit longer for things to dry. But that's one of the advantages of watercolor, is you can pick up the paint off of the paper. So anytime you get paint somewhere you don't want it, you can pick it up pretty easily when it's watercolor. You can either just use a clean brush with a little bit of clean clear water, place it over that area, and then dry your brush and then use your brush to pick up the color, or you can even use a paper towel or a towel to pick up the color as well. I'm going to finish up these flowers here, and then I will move on to the bird. I should have waited more for a lot of these sections so I didn't have to do so much cleanup, but I didn't want to be bouncing back and forth from the flower to the bird for you guys. So I'm just about done with this flower. I'm going to take some more of that green and just add a little bit more of the green to the stem and some of the leaves, just to darken it up a little bit and create a little gradation and a little contrast so it's a little bit more interesting. Now moving on to the bird, I'm going to start with this really beautiful pale purple. It's called Wisteria. I'm going to paint the head, or half of the head, and the beginning portion of the tail feathers with this purple color. And here I mix this blue with a little bit of that wisteria, a little bit of that purple, to kind of create this really pretty lilac color. And I'm painting now the end of the tail feathers and the wing here with this kind of lilac-y color that I mixed the blue and the wisteria together to create. And that will help also to make the transition between the purple to that blue a little bit easier to create, because that blue has a little bit of that purple mixed in with it. And now I'm just, again, trying to smooth out that gradation, adding a little bit more of the blue, adding a little bit more wisteria, just to have a softer, smoother gradation. Now I'm going to take some of that blue and just paint the belly of the bird, and again, creating a nice gradation so that belly has some beautiful roundness. And now I'm moving on to painting in the lines with the very tip of my brush. My brush here that I've been using the whole time is a No. 1 round brush, which is really great for these small images and especially great for creating little lines, which you'll see me do here in just a second again, which it'll be a little bit more obvious on the eye here that I paint on the bird. I actually did this linear lines on the tail feathers and wing as well, but it's harder to tell. And now my watercoloring is all done on the bird, or just about done, I should say, on the bird and the flowers. So here's that background that I stamped. Now I'm going to do the same kind of watercoloring that I did on that flower, completely over all the images here on the stamp background. I'm going to play a little bit of music, and then I'll meet you guys back when I'm done. Okay, so I'm done now with my background. The next thing I'm going to do is stamp my sentiment. I went ahead and die cut off camera the flower and the bird that I stamped on that scrap paper and watercolored in the very beginning. And now I'm going to use that same scrap of watercolor paper to stamp my sentiment. I'm going to grab my sentiment off of the Always stamp set. This Always stamp set has some of the sweetest sentiments, and I just love them paired with the images in this set. They're just perfect. So I centered my sentiment, and now I'm inking it up in a distress ink. This is called Shaded Lilac. So I'm going to stamp it a couple times in the Shaded Lilac, and then I'm going to move on to a second color to create a little gradation on the sentiment. This will kind of match the look of my watercolor. So my second color here is a Distress Oxide called Faded Jeans, and I'm angling my ink pad to just kind of hit the lower portion of each of the sentiments. So the lower portion of the letters of the words in the sentiment. It's a little tricky to do, especially with the sentiments lined up, but as long as you get a little bit of that darker color somewhere on the sentiment, it's going to have a nice kind of watercolor look. You know how watercolor kind of typically goes from light to dark, so it mimics that look pretty well. So now I'm going to glue my watercolor panel onto an A2 top folding card base. I'm just going to use some Tombow Mono multi-liquid adhesive here. This adhesive does really well for holding down watercolor panels. It's nice and strong. I went ahead and trimmed my sentiment down to a strip, added some foam tape to the back of it, and now I'm going to stick it at the upper portion of my card. I've also added small amounts of foam tape to the back of the flowers and to the back of the bird. Just removing the backing now, and I'm going to stick these flowers a little bit overlapping my sentiment. And the last thing I have to adhere here is the bird, so I'm just figuring out where I want that bird to go exactly, and now I'm ready to stick it down, remove the backing, and then stick that bird down. And that will complete my card. I'll hold it up to the camera here so you can see it a little bit more closely. I really liked working with these Daniel Smith watercolors. I plan on doing a lot more cards with them in the future and get some more practice under my belt, but they're very fun to use with this no-line watercoloring technique. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you want any more information on the products I use, please visit waffleflower.com, and you can follow us on YouTube, Instagram, and Facebook for more creative ideas. Thanks for watching.